Hello everybody. So today I wanted to look at what life might have been like 100,000 years ago. Obviously I wasn't there, so I'm speculating a bit, but I do know a few things that definitely were around at that time. The first one, pretty obviously, the Egyptian pyramids. Now these were created 108,000 years ago. We know this, we've got mathematical equations for preciseness and all that sort of stuff. That's the date, 108,000. Maybe 104. So 100,000 years ago, they would have been relatively new. Now I say relatively, that's still 4,000, 8,000 years. But compared to how old they are now, they would have been new. And I'm talking about the pyramids in Giza. I know there are other pyramids around. Don't know for sure when those ones were made. Maybe they were made at the same time, maybe not. Can't really carbon date stone. But what we can say is that the ancient Egyptians decorated them, but they never claimed to have built them. They were already there. They had a try at building them, but failed pretty badly. They couldn't do it. So, and we've tried to build them too. We can't do it. We can't build a pyramid bigger than a house, and let alone with the precision and able to survive that long. We've got no hope. There's no way that ancient Egypt could have made them. There's no possibility. And we know how technologically advanced they were. They were not that technologically advanced. They've never suggested how they built them. They were already there. So there were no people living in Egypt 108,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago. It was an empty desert. Nobody lived there. And they also didn't, if there were a few handful of people around, because there certainly were humans alive at that time, humans have been around for 2.3 million years. But they wouldn't have been powerful enough to build the pyramids, and there weren't enough of them. So why bother creating these pyramids? Well, we know that the pyramids were created for, they were mobile power stations. So essentially, you know how we have mobile phones? Well, electricity started out being mobile. In the late 19th century, when Nikola Tesla invented it, he based it on the pyramids, and he made them mobile. But they were very dangerous. So then we made them grounded and safer and more complicated. But the simple version, the mobile electricity version, certainly would have been viable for ancient people. And the main thing that you need to control it is an extreme hierarchy with power levels and people not allowed to fight against the hierarchy. That's what you need for it to be safe. So, and they probably had that in ancient times, or pre-ancient times, because I'm talking about 100,000 years ago. So these were created essentially not as war machines, but as mobile power stations that could survive a war. So essentially, if you're having a war, particularly if you're relying on that electricity to power your weapons, maybe your weapons power up and then go dead after a while, you need to have a mobile power station nearby. And these great pyramids allowed that. Now, why only have them in Giza? Well, they probably did have them other places, but they got destroyed. And the reason why the ones in Giza survived is probably because they were too far away from the conflict, and they never saw battle. So essentially, the actual mobile power stations would have been smaller. They would have been more fragile. They would have been destroyed very easily, and they would have had them everywhere. And they would have only had these difficult to create stone pyramids only in places that were of strategic importance. Now, essentially, we were fighting a war against the Neanderthals. Now, we'd been fighting it for at least 20,000 years by then, from 130,000 to 30,000 years ago. So we're already 20,000 years into the war, and we were losing. So we needed some way to stop against their attacks. And where they were attacking, so they'd already taken control of all of Asia, or most of Asia, and most of Europe. Their base was in India. They called it the Aryan Empire. Yes, I know there's a mustachioed fellow that used the word Aryan, but it doesn't mean German, it means Indian. And these people were based in India, and these were the Neanderthals. They called themselves Aryans, the Sumerians called them Adamu, and we called them orcs, trolls, goblins, and other horrible names, because we didn't like them. They were fighting us, they were killing us, they were apparently even eating us. So we didn't want to fight them and we didn't want to give them nice names or descriptions, so we gave them terrible names. We made them sound absolutely evil, and we made up stories that made them sound absolutely horrific. And I mean, yes, there are people, in fact most people alive today have Neanderthal DNA, but that was probably not by choice. They were probably taken slaves, forced into sex, forced into having children and so forth. So yeah, we weren't friends, certainly not during that time period. And in fact, if you look at Sumerian history of when they said the Adamu were created, they said the Adamu were created as slaves and then they freed themselves. So if you've got slaves being freed and coming back, they're going to be pretty nasty. And those Adamu, those Aryans, those Neanderthals, they came back stronger than us, smarter than us, and prepared to kill all of us in revenge. And we should have died. We should have become absolutely extinct as a species, but we didn't. We won, somehow. So these pyramids helped a little bit with that. Now, how do we create them? Probably with the mobile electricity we already had, because that would have, within the field, allowed us to move these big blocks. So all we'd need is a smaller pyramid to help us to build a bigger pyramid. And hey presto, there are 4 smaller pyramids and then 3 bigger ones. Now even the 4 smaller ones we can't build today, but we could have if we had even smaller power generators that have since been destroyed. Now, so you can imagine there would have been normal power generators, then the 4 smaller pyramids, and then the 3 big ones. And you would have had that set up all around the battle lines. Now why put it in Giza? That wasn't a battle line. They were fighting in the Middle East. So the Middle East was the control of Sumer, who were the great enemy of Arya. They were the ones that enslaved them. They were their absolute enemies. And they all lived in the Middle East, in Arabia, or what we now call the Arab lands, the mostly Muslim-controlled lands. So that area is where they fought. That area was not too hot that the Aryans couldn't go, because they couldn't go south of the Saharan Desert. The south of the Saharan Desert, sub-Saharan Africa as we call it, it was too hot for the Aryans. And they couldn't go too far north because it was too cold for them. So weather was their issue. So they didn't really need to put anything in Egypt. It was too far south, particularly not South Egypt. And that's why they survived. So, perhaps the other ones were destroyed, or at least the big ones were. We do have a few other pyramids in Egypt that survived. But again, nobody was living in Egypt. So these were just backups. They were just so people could go there if they lost their main lands. Now the main land was obviously Sumer, which was based around Uruk, which is today Iraq. And in fact Iraq literally translates to land of Uruk. And so that's still called Sumer today. So Iraq is Sumer. But it was actually a bit bigger than that. It was quite a lot bigger at different points. And another area was Atlantis. So Atlantis was around then. In fact, Atlantis survived from 128,000 years ago, that was when it was founded, to 11,400 years ago. And it wasn't all that big, it only had 10 cities. The main city was in Mauritania, in what is today called the Richat structure. It's still there, but it's been destroyed. And it's actually lifted up. I know we know that happened from the flood, but floods don't always sink everything. Some things get lifted up. And in the case of Atlantis, it was lifted up. So after Atlantis was destroyed, and it was very much destroyed, the people went to Egypt. Now they didn't just go to Egypt, they also went to Maya, or South America. But a lot of them went to Egypt because they knew they already had those pyramids there. And they knew they had a good defensive position in case the Aryans struck. So, of course the Aryans had already lost by then, but there was a suspicion that the Aryans had caused them to be destroyed in the cataclysm, because they'd actually survived 5 cataclysms. That was the 5th one. And why did that 5th one destroy them when the other 4 didn't? Possibly because the Aryans tricked them, and that might be why in the fallout white people were created. So the Egyptians were, or at least the pharaohs, were actually from Atlantis. Now, of course, eventually they were all killed and replaced by regular people. In fact, Egypt was defeated several times over. And there's very little suggestion that modern day Egyptians are descended from Atlanteans. They might be, but they might not. Now, Greece also claimed to have defeated Atlantis, but I think more likely they defeated Prydain. Now, Prydain was another civilization that was around 100,000 years ago, but it was not an advanced one. Prydain is today the British Isles, plus also France, and an area in between them that we today is sunken, and we today refer to as the Doggerland. Obviously it wasn't called the Doggerlands at the time. Doggerland is the name of a ship, which didn't exist back then. So it was called Prydain, so probably. That was